Let's start with this Mehdi Hasan
factual
interview.
inaccuracies, Matt. Let's talk factual inaccuracies. Stanford, you talk a lot about the Election Integrity Project in the Twitter files, which Stanford and the University of Washington founded to monitor attacks on our elections. And you say some stuff about them that a lot of your critics say is not true, and that affects your credibility. You said the EIP was founded in response to the government dropping its proposal for a disinformation governance. Well, there you are. We're quoting you on screen. It wasn't. It was formed 2 years earlier. You suggest it was government funded, even though during the 2020 election that you're covering, it wasn't. You say they labeled 22 million tweets as misinformation in the run-up to the 2020 vote. They didn't. They flagged 3,000 election misinformation tweets for labeling, so you were only 21,997,000 off. And you also claim the EIP was, let me finish the question, you can come back in. You also claim the EIP was partnered with the government Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Agency, CISA, to censor Twitter, but you mix up CISA, CISA, a Homeland Security Agency, with the Center for Internet Security, the CIS, which is a non-profit. In fact, you added an A to CIS. I think people can see it there in brackets to make that false claim. It's just error after error, Matt, on just this one topic.
Error. But the other ones aren't.
No,
22 million number came from their own report?
Yeah, it came from a report in March. Do you know what the 22 million number is, Matt? Can you tell me? Because we checked. 22 million is the number of tweets about election misinformation that they just mapped. How many tweets were they? The ones they actually flagged to Twitter before the election, 22 million came after the election. It wasn't in the run-up. They flagged 3,000. So you were off by 21,997,000. It's another error.
They've said a lot of things. I stand by my story.
The errors that Mehdi confronted Taibbi with were not substantial errors, when they were errors at all. For example, Mehdi's objection was that it was the CIS, not the CISA, that the EIP was in partnership with. But the EIP website reads, EIP partnered with the CISA in 2020. Both to help them understand rumors and disinformation around the 2020 election, and so that the CISA could provide corrective and/or clarifying information from election officials. Mehdi is doing the Department of Homeland Security a service here as he muddies the water, obscuring the connections between the entities. After all, what good is a cutout organization if it is known to be tied to your security agency? Better to leave that hidden in plain sight. Regarding the 22 million tweets, this one is a bit more thorny. Alex Stamos from the EIP tweeted out the full report that Matt Taibbi used as his source. Having read it, I can tell you that while it's true that the EIP didn't make a request to take down 22 million tweets, they did capture 22 million tweets that they labeled as misinformation. Rather than ask for the tweets to be taken down, they analyzed them in order to track the source of the misinformation to spreader accounts. The report, when read in full, is really frightening for people who care about free speech because it proposes institutionalizing relationships with social media companies and training social media personnel in advance of upcoming, quote, disinformation events. That is, meeting regularly with social media companies to help them set up terms of service that will coincide with the needs of the state.
I'm going to concede a few points to you. One, that you're right that it's actually quite difficult to adjudicate in any reasonable way, what the broader impact of these activities were, how much they suppressed, and that it's certainly possible to speculate in ways that suggest, that there was a much larger impact than this. Like, I'll accept that point. Okay. Mm-hmm. And then, the second point I will take from you is that, I think I was being, I've decided to be pedantic about a few things in relation to this. And, my point previously was to argue that if you're going to go in front of Congress and make this kind of testimony, you should be quite, you should try to be quite precise, and you should try to be as as honest and rigorous as possible. So my objection to the presentation of the two journalists aforementioned in front of Congress is on those grounds. I think, there are various ways, and this is the second point I'm conceding to you here, is there are various ways we can interpret this project and its impact, right? And I agree with you that it's possible to reasonably interpret it in the way that you were suggesting.
The death of God is about the drying up of a horizon of meaning and of a whole form of human life.
Where do we stand in the illusion it makes? What kind of space are we invited into?
The material relations between people become social relations between things. When we look at toasters, corn, and TVs, we don't
We
see
still, to a large extent, live in the interregnum between worlds, if you will, or between paradigms. Not many people in the history of the world have faced that.
Diet Soap is a Sublation Media podcast. Geoff Shullenberger is Compact Magazine's managing editor, and previously he was a clinical associate professor of expository writing at NYU. And Geoff, that's all I've got on you. That's your bio. That's what I have. Is there anything you want to add?
Good enough.
Okay. We've been debating on Twitter about the meaning of, let's say the Twitter files or the disinformation war, or just Michael Shellenberger, not Geoff Shullenberger.
Yeah, the Naomi Wolf to my Naomi Klein.
Yeah.
With whom I am, in fact, sometimes mistaken.
Anyway, Michael Shellenberger describes this as the Censorship Industrial Complex. He's got a way with words, I suppose. He's good at naming things. That's what we've been debating, and I guess I'm having you on so we can have this in a more this conversation and debate in a more civilized way rather than yelling at each other on Twitter. I think Twitter brings out the worst in people, or at least in me. But to begin with, I guess what I'd ask you to do is to summarize what you think it is that we disagree about. What would be the stakes of this conversation? What are we trying to determine?
Sure. So I should first of all rewind, because I think part of the reason I've sort of engaged with you and a few others critically on this issue is that I'd say for quite a while I was probably on largely the same page as you, and as what we might call in turn the Twitter files industrial complex or something like that. The sort of the various journalists who were involved in the Twitter files expose, and I think of those journalists, the one I most admire and continue to really find incredibly insightful is Li Fang. I have various degrees of disagreement with the other figures, including Matt Taibbi, Michael Shellenberger, the aforementioned, and others who were involved in that early on. But I'd say overall, I was a fellow traveler. I appreciated what they were doing, and I was willing to give the new Twitter, certainly the benefit of the doubt. I wrote something about it at the time when Musk took over, and thought that there was at least a salutary project at work there, and that also the Twitter files, trying to open up what had occurred was a valuable contribution, and so I didn't have any problems with that. So I suppose the point, the specific point I think we got into a spat about was you, on a few occasions, I think, asserted that the Democrats were running on ending the First Amendment or overturning the First Amendment or something along those lines. Mm-hmm. And, I feel like there's a way you can sort of make the case for that, which is to cite these statements by various Democratic grandees, including Hillary Clinton, John Kerry, and both members of the ticket that said things to the effect that well, the First Amendment is an obstacle to dealing with, or in the case of Tim Walz, actually, it was maybe the worst instance, because he actually seems like profoundly ignorant of basic First Amendment jurisprudence in terms of his remarks on this subject. And so I do, I do agree that those statements were largely kind of disturbing and reflected very badly on the figures who made them. And so, I'm with you on a lot of this stuff. So something I've been trying to figure out, and it's not just your statement to that effect, but I've just found myself increasingly disagreeing with various people who are kind of, particularly focused on these free speech and First Amendment issues as they relate to online speech. And so in some ways, I've sort of been trying to figure out what the basis of my own objection is. So in the course of this conversation, this is just what you asked me. I hope to attempt to, in a sense, excavate my own thinking process and how I became somewhat disillusioned with this. So, I mean, the first simple answer with that preamble out of the way is just that I think there's a tendency to overestimate it's true that there were various projects in this kind of anti-disinformation sphere that, were implemented roughly from 2016 through the present, although there has been a kind of winding down of various of them and a kind of weakening of them. Partly because of the efforts of these sort of whistleblowers or whatever you want to call them to kind of shine light on what was going on. And so to that extent, I think that was true. But even without that, I think my main assessment is, yes, there was this kind of, very ambitious and often totalitarian sounding project that was an attempt to respond to the apparent, increasing inability to control the information sphere by the state. And yet, my overall assessment is that project was just a profound failure in achieving what it set out to achieve. And, certainly has in no way, I would argue, come close to overturning the First Amendment or anything like that. And offers no, and there is simply no mechanism by which I would argue that is conceivable. So what I'm sort of trying to hold open is the possibility of being critical of the Kerrys and Walzes and so on of the world for their, for their views on this and for their involvement with various projects that I largely think were misguided, if not, and often sinister. But at the same time, I think when we look at what this actually pans out to, it turns out to be quite. It turns out to be quite difficult to identify anything that it's achieved in terms of its own stated aims, and so I suppose my disagreement is with us arriving in 2024 and not taking stock of the actual track record of this, whatever we want to call it, kind of vast anti-disinformation complex that sprung up, which I'll let you follow up in a sec, but just want to make one other point. The thing that it's most reminded me of as I've thought about it is after the 2016 election, the sort of fons et origo of all of this was in part this whole narrative around Cambridge Analytica, right? And this idea that there was this kind of sinister behind the scenes, like manipulation machine that had been developed by these extremely clever, Svengalis of a sort of new digital politics. And that, various journalists, including notably Carol Cadwalader of The Guardian, really pushed this idea that the only way to understand both the Brexit and the Trump wins in 2016 was to understand the kind of behind the scenes machinations of this, extremely sinister, highly sophisticated operation centered around this Cambridge Analytica company. And I think it became clear relatively quickly, if you were paying attention, that, a lot of what had happened here was that Cadwalader and other journalists who covered this and, covered it very breathlessly had basically just looked at Cambridge Analytica's own slide decks and said, oh, wow, they say they can do X, Y, and Z. That's pretty crazy. Damn, they must have overturned the election. So in other words, they took Cambridge Analytica's own hype about its ability to bring about these results at face value without questioning it, and then simply turned it from Cambridge Analytica's marketing spiel into this kind of sinister kind of mind control narrative that that allowed you to understand the 2016 sort of populist shock as the results, not of like genuine popular discontent or anything like that, but of these kind of sinister digital manipulation algorithms working behind the scenes. And then I think, and this is kind of what I've concluded, that unfortunately a lot of the sort of anti-disinformation literature of the sort that's been produced by the people around the Twitter files, I think in some ways does the same thing. In fact, if we wanted to pinpoint a specific instance, which I believe you and I and our other interlocutor, Dan Williams, pinpointed this example. There is often thrown around this claim that 22 million tweets were censored by the Election Integrity Project, right? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now, this has been heavily disputed. I think it is incorrect to claim the 22 million tweets. Based on the evidence that I have seen, I think it is simply a false claim. And my understanding is that the source of this claim, it's not quite a slide deck. It's like a report that was produced by the Election Integrity Project itself. It's a public report that was put out and that stated, post after the 2020 election, that, they had flagged roughly 22 million tweets that fell into this category of like election disinformation about as they defined it. So the point I'm trying to make here we can get into that number, whatever. I can't claim to have the perfect knowledge of what exactly that is, but my understanding is that the operation was very similar to what I'm saying with how Cadwallader covered. This liberal journalist Cadwallader covered Cambridge Analytica, which is to take the Election Integrity Project's own in this case, public-facing document, and pluck out this number, which was partly the Election Integrity Project, hyping its own efficacy at identifying this particular type of stuff, because it's an organization that wants to have funding and support and be taken seriously. And so this number is hyped in one context, which is that the Election Integrity Project is saying, look at how systematic and capacious we are and how we catalog this kind of material. And then it's plucked out, I believe, originally by this guy, Mike Benz, who falsely claims to have been the quote unquote head of cyber in the State Department, which he was not, and who was the source of this claim, which he passed on, I believe, to Taibbi and Shellenberger, having plucked it out of this Election Integrity Project report. And then they presented it in the congressional hearings that they appeared in. So this number is kind of an example of the same phenomenon where this, in a sense, the entity that's being accused of being sinister, as with Cambridge Analytica, the Election Integrity Project, is actually the source of this, seemingly dramatic assertion, because it was itself putting out a document claiming this. And then this is turned around and made into an accusation against it. So what I see here is basically a weird reversal. And the purpose it serves, just to finalize this point, is very similar to the Cambridge Analytica purpose. Ultimately, the purpose it serves is to claim that Trump did not lose the 2020 election, just as the purpose of the Cambridge Analytica thing was to claim that Hillary Clinton had not legitimately lost the election. The purpose of it is to claim there was this massive censorship machine that censored all these tweets, and therefore, the election was rigged against Trump through this censorship, right? This is the claim that J.D. Vance made on numerous occasions during the campaign. It seems to be the respectable version of the stolen election narrative from 2020. And so I think ultimately both the purpose of this, even though it's often framed in these lofty terms about defending the First Amendment, is actually quite limited and narrow, which is to produce a sort of counter narrative in which it can be claimed that Trump, even if you don't believe the stuff about, whatever, boxes of ballots being found in the middle of the night, there's this kind of more sophisticated claim that Trump actually won and was cheated out of the result. And that is, again,
Okay, all right, I'm
exactly
going to have to
parallel
stop
to
you
the
now. I'm
Hillary
going to have to
Clinton.
stop you
Yeah,
because you're
fine.
saying so many different things. Many of them I don't agree with, and now I'm going to have to try to remember every claim you've made. And so I'm worried. Like, oh, what am I forgetting that he said that was wrong 10 minutes ago? So let's see if I can just start with the last thing you said and go backwards. Claims like Cambridge Analytica fixed the election, for Trump, are rhetorical arguments about how much of a political mandate someone like Trump should have. Their claims about the political significance of the Trump win. There was no one who was saying that the Cambridge Analytica story would have necessitated redoing or negating the outcome of the 2016 election. So that's the first thing to start with. And so when you say this censorship apparatus cost Trump the election, again, that is not the kind of claim that would necessitate the overturning of an election. Whereas I think literal vote switching or going in and fixing the vote or having dead people vote, things like that might, although I'm not, but the argument around so in both cases, you're just talking about rhetoric around the political power or mandate or legitimacy of the winner of an election. You're not actually making any kind of legal case, and you're not, and it can't go any farther than that, which is why it is the moderate claim around election rigging. That's because it only has a rhetorical effect, or it only has a political aim. So that's not a very, yeah, sure, maybe those are equal. But
don't you think it's significant that, when challenged about...
Wait, you got
Trump's...
12 minutes straight.
Sorry.
You got 12 minutes straight, okay? So no. So that's the first thing. I put that to the side. That, like, maybe there's some sort of moral comparison, or there's a similarity between the two kinds of claims. But for the American people, for everyday people, the significance of this is not about the 2020 election result. Okay, that's not for someone like Jacob Siegel or myself. The concern was not about proving that Donald Trump really did win, or even making any kind of claim about the legitimacy of the Biden administration to rule, but rather to question the way in which the American public was being governed. So that's the first thing. Now, the step back into the long fuse report. I didn't know that Mike Benz was the one who pulled that claim out of the report. I did, after Taibbi went on Mehdi Hassan's show, read the long fuse, or read a good deal of it, and specifically read it in order to try to get to the bottom of what the claim was in the long fuse around flagging and the suppression of information online. And I made a video about it, and I wrote an essay about it. Let's see if I can pull up what it's in Google Docs, but so I can pull up exactly what my argument was and remember it. But since it's not quickly coming up here, what I'll say is this: the way these flagging and suppression and censorship of social media worked was that they were going to seek out what they called spreader accounts, or like accounts that had a large reach and had a lot of influence online, and they would target those people and those kinds of tweets with suppression or censorship, which would then have this knockdown effect of stopping the spread of the information to many, many others. And so the millions that they talked about in that long fuse had to do with not the going through and censoring millions directly, but censoring the source so that millions more would not be encountering this disinformation. And that, so it is not inaccurate to say that the suppression of tweets that the long fuse report describes, what that happened during the Election Integrity Project, censored tens of millions, was censorship that affected tens of millions of people.
Okay,
That's
you just slipped from censored tens of millions to was censorship that affected tens of millions of people.
Yeah, because see, censorship works in both directions. When you censor something, you not only censor someone's right to speak, but you also censor or stop someone from having the right to hear. So that censorship always has a two-way path. And when you stop someone, when you cancel a concert, you are censoring that for everyone who might have attended that concert, not just the person on stage. So yes, that's right. The right to hear, the right to understand information, right to receive ideas was stopped, and was what's the word I'm looking for? Well, these people's rights were abridged in the tens of millions. Okay, that so that is a fact. I
don't think you've established it's a fact. You've just said
that's what they reported in the long fuse. That's what the long fuse report said. That they were. So if you think the long fuse report was lying, I would point out that it's a different kind of thing than the Cambridge Analytic documents that you refer to, because it wasn't trying to sell a product in the future, but it was giving an assessment of what had already been done. So this was their own assessment of what had been done. The other thing is that the number, I think, but I'm not sure about this, referred to Twitter, and the efforts were made not only on Twitter, but on Facebook and many other social media companies. Also, this was not the only organization that was actually operative at that time. There were other efforts in this direction going on that we don't have the reports on. So this is just one public document that reported one effort to control and censor the internet. I would say that, if the EIP did this on the scale of 20 million, then it probably goes well beyond that in terms of who was affected by the censorship apparatus, or the effort to censor the internet. So that would be what I would want to see. Now I've forgotten some of the other things that you said early on. Oh, just running on abridging the First Amendment. I was surprised during the campaign to hear those statements from John Kerry and Hillary Clinton, and Tim Walz, and even Kamala Harris, although Kamala Harris had said this in 2000, her statements came from before this campaign. Because I was first shocked to hear how the Democrats responded during the weaponization of government hearing with Taibbi and Shellenberger, and well, there was one other witness, I think, there, but perhaps not. But anyhow, what I heard again and again from the Democrats, in a pretty disciplined messaging strategy, was that hate speech wasn't protected speech, that they had an obligation to protect the public from bad information. This was the stance of the Democrats during that hearing. And to hear it in that hearing, when they didn't think everybody was watching, was shocking enough. But then to see them come out during a campaign and kind of at times seem to be making that their public messaging was significant. So they were running on the idea that the First Amendment should be overturned, in my estimation. They didn't say it always so directly, but they even did say it that directly. I And all of this was so concerning to me because I felt working on the left, working from a socialist perspective, I saw many people who were on the left embrace a similar attitude. I thought people who were socialists or concerned about workers' rights or poverty or stopping war, all of these kinds of stances which I support, were abandoning speech and demonstrating a willingness to let go of the First Amendment. So that was what was most concerning to me. So now I've said enough, and I'll let you respond.
So I do still think my understanding of perhaps we could pull up this report and find the passage or passages in question, but my understanding is that you are mischaracterizing it, that the 22 million number referred to that they had done a kind of assessment of the total number of tweets that had relayed certain, claims about the election that they had determined or, had categorized as misinformation. And so the origin of that number was simply that they had, done a full sort of scrape of Twitter and identified this number of tweets that fell into this category and that they tracked, right? And so this was only done after the fact. So, and specifically that, Shellenberger and Taibbi in their congressional appearance specifically stated that the Election Integrity Project had, quote, censored 22 million tweets. Okay. So
yeah,
I think I'm
that's
comfortable saying that that was a false statement on their part.
This is why it was so serious. This is why it was so serious to rebut this claim, because that the accusation that it was a false claim led to an accusation of perjury as well. Taibbi received a letter from, I think it was Stacey Plaskett, accusing him of perjury and saying there might be legal repercussions. And also Mehdi Hassan made the same claim that it was false and that it amounted to perjury. Of course, it wouldn't, even if it was an error, that wouldn't make it perjury. I would say, I spent some time on this question because of that debate, and I've got the long fuse up right now. Probably wouldn't be, given how complex the approach to scraping and evaluating the data is, and how long this report is. I think that I'm going to be disciplined and not spend 10 minutes trying to find but do we even have the actual number right? Because if we do, I could search for that number in this document. But
so the number claimed again in the congressional testimony was 22 million. And then various
which was
people,
rounding, right? That was a rounded number. It's probably not the actual number in the report. But so I was going to do a search, right? To go ahead.
Yeah. But so my understanding again is that this was kind of they produced this document that said there were 22 million, approximately 22 million tweets that were categorized in within their sort of election disinformation classifications, right? And
I've got the document here.
And so this, as I understand it, does not it simply does not because it appears in a document that only appeared after the election. So it sounds like what I'm saying is they simply were categorizing the tweets that fell into this category. It sounds like what you are claiming is that they said because what they did was, send these tickets to Twitter to, flag these certain kinds of claims. And I think what you seem to be claiming is that while they did not flag or, much less censor or delete that number of tweets, which is certainly what I mean, this is why, like, it seems very clear to me that Shellenberger and Taibbi were either, I mean, we're simply engaged in hyperbole. Like, they were not, there's no conceivable way you can argue that there is any evidence that there were 22 million censored tweets like that there's simply no basis for that.
Well, there actually is. That's just simply not true.
But you,
I mean, look, I just made one, but hold on. Well, no, but no, not only did my explanation point to that, but
no, it didn't.
There was,
it did not. You
but
said
there,
that,
but hold on.
There were
but
tens of millions of people affected. That is not the same as tens of millions of people censored, and certainly not tens of millions of tweets censored, which is the statement.
When you target a tweet that's being retweeted, and you take it down, what is the impact on all the people, the thousands of, or tens of thousands, or hundreds of thousands of people who have retweeted?
Yeah, but you're not.
No, wait. But would that not take that down for all of them? Would that not take all of those retweets down?
Yes, but I have not come across any evidence that actually happened.
That is what they were doing. That is what they were doing. That is one of the things. That is what. They were targeting spreader accounts. They would go to the original tweet that was getting a lot of retweets or reposting. That is what they were doing. That's what the long fuse report shows. But also beyond that, the number, there's also the question of the tickets, okay? So they talked about hundreds of tickets that they would send out. Okay, but those tickets were not each one a post. They would have a variety of different numbers of posts or content that each ticket would include. So to determine how many tweets were targeted for direct censorship from this report is complicated, because you didn't have to have access to at least an average of how many posts were included in each ticket, which I didn't find in the long fuse report. So first, yes, by targeting spreader accounts with tickets for marking them for suppression or deletion, they could easily have affected millions of tweets simply by taking down.
But you're just.
That is their claim. That is their own claim.
A demonstrably false claim, which is that they said you're defending.
That's not demonstrably false. That is not demonstrably false
claim.
No, that's demonstrably.
They took a number and misinterpreted it. It's completely clear. They misinterpreted it, and you are just creating a generous reading to try to rescue.
No, I'm simply reading the actual long fuse report and what it said that they did. Okay? Now, so the question
you're
about
they could have, but you're not actually proving that. You're just saying that it could have had that effect.
I'm telling you what their claim was. Okay? I'm trying to tell you what the long fuse claim.
That is not where the 22 million number comes from.
Where does it come from?
It comes from them saying that they classified 22 million tweets post facto after the election that fell into the categories they defined as misinformation or election misinformation. That is where the 22 million number comes from.
Okay. Let's find that out. I mean, let's look. Let's take as long as it takes to go through the report and make sure you're right, because and also what that means, that they found that number of tweets that were disinformation. Because, there are multiple points where they give numbers of demonstrating how their initial harvesting efforts went. And the 22, I think there are numbers that go beyond 22 million in this report. So let's see, where would I look for that in the report? Because I did this work already. Like I went through this. Okay. And the fact is, data and summary statistics. Let's see. Where was this? Ticket analysis questions, repeat spreaders. If we could, I'll search for 22 million and see what I find in this report, because I did this already a while ago. But the point is that it's not easy to determine at a first blush just what it means to flag or to send a ticket or how many posts that they're referring to. And the people who are claiming that they were not accurate at the weaponization hearing were certainly just as lazy and as you're saying Mike Benz was. So it actually requires a close examination to figure out what was happening here. So let's see.
The only thing I am trying to demonstrate here, I don't believe it is possible for us to assess this impact in any particularly clear or definitive way. What I do think it's possible to say is that Shellenberger and Taibbi hyped this number and, again, claimed that there were,
hype is
22 million censored tweets.
And I don't believe that's wrong. I do believe
the
that's
22
right.
million number does not refer to a number of tweets that are censored. It does not refer to that.
So
if they went in front of Congress and said that,
it does
either
refer to
being
that
sloppy.
because it refers to the total number of tweets that were impacted by their flagging.
No, it doesn't refer to impacted.
Yeah, it does, because
it
they were going after.
Classified them after the fact. They classified them after the fact in this post-election report. Those were not the number of tweets that they flagged or ticketed or whatever. That is the number of tweets that they.
Those were the number of tweets that they found that were counted as disinformation, and that were.
You're saying that if I go on, it sounds like by your definition, if I go on Twitter and identify 1,000 tweets that I claim are disinformation, and then publish a report listing these tweets, then I am censoring the people who, by your definition, that is censorship. What I'm doing.
No, I'm saying if you go online and you find 1,000 tweets that are disinformation, and then you also evaluate the 30 accounts that were the original source of those information, and you target those original accounts and take those down, thereby taking down all of the 1,000, that you are censoring the 1,000. That's what I'm saying.
You're saying this hypothetically,
That's what they did. There's a whole section on targeting spreader accounts in the Long Fuse report. Okay, that is how the thing operated. They would target spreader accounts, and they would attempt to take those down, rather than going one at a time through every single post. But they also, using machine learning, I guess, scooped up all of the tweets. I mean, they scooped the 22,000 and not the total number of tweets or posts that they found. Those are the 22 million. I mean, those are all the ones that they labeled as disinformation after their initial sweep, and then they targeted those different, using narratives. They would create narratives they took all this information, they created narratives around sets of these disinformation posts. Then they would find the spreader accounts and they flagged those for either removal or suppression. That's what they did.
Okay, but you're still. I'm honestly shocked that you're defending the claim that 22
I'm
million
honestly
tweets
shocked
were
that you're not
censored.
understanding my argument.
No, I mean
we can both play this game of being
I don't
shocking.
think your argument is convincing.
Well, I think it's perfectly convincing, and I think that you're belligerently refusing to understand my argument.
Well, I think you're refusing to understand that Michael Shellenberger and Matt Taibbi went into Congress with this number.
Doesn't matter who these people are. The point is,
Mike Benz, and without even, and made the statement that there were 22 million censored tweets, even though the report itself does not say that. And so you're then stretching the definition of censorship.
You have to interpret the report to understand what the 22 million tweet posts is, and I'm doing that interpretation. That 22 million posts number is, and I'm doing the interpretation for you so you can understand that that it is in fact true. They did not put in the report 22 million posts were taken down. What they did was give a complex description of how their process worked. And the 22 million posts, which were, this is how I remember this working out.
So I think maybe we will not agree on this, because in part you're claiming that this is based on your interpretation of it. So it's not going to be resolved by the document itself, because unless I accept your interpretation of it, then
you have to read the document. Have you read the long fuse report?
I have skimmed through it, yes.
Okay, well, so we both read it. So what could you explain to me what they were doing with that group of 22 million posts that they called disinformation?
They after the election, as I understand it, did a total tally of the tweets that they thought fell in this category. Right. And then they put them in the report. They counted up the total number of tweets that fell into these various kind of delegitimization of the election type narratives, and said that the total number was 22 million. So again, if you want to claim that that means 22 million tweets were censored, then that would be equivalent to if I went on Twitter right now, identified 100 tweets I thought were misinformation, posted on my blog about them, and then you claim that I had just censored 100 tweets. I mean, that's what it sounds like to me. So
this is all gathered up in a process that included flagging tweets for suppression. It was not that they simply were doing research about how much disinformation was online. They were actively attempting to suppress that disinformation.
Well, yes. So perhaps we should get into the more kind of the less factual territory, because I think you're look, I think I understand your position, which is something like just by even though the number of the number of tickets that they submitted was something like 3,000, as I understand it. And then of those, something like 2/3 or 3/4 were not acted on. So then, so let me try to.
Yeah, but each ticket, that's not, a ticket is not a post. Okay, there could be hundreds or thousands of posts in a given ticket.
Okay.
All right. So a ticket is not, we found RFK Jr. said something we don't like. The ticket would include lists and lists of like Excel sheets with posts. And so that's the first thing to understand. And the second thing to understand is that that the tickets were then targeting, they created ways to target the spreader accounts. Their estimation of how much disinformation they found, we need to track down what section that appeared in. My understanding was it was not simply describing how much some sort of initial culling of the.
So I'm looking at the Stanford Internet Observatory, which offers some summary material on all of this, right? So
well, I wouldn't look there because they were caught out and they started to shift what they were saying quite a lot in response to being exposed. I would look to the long fuse report itself. I'll tell you what. Why don't we just bracket this? I'll go through it. I'll send you, all the relevant quotes. I'll take an hour. I'll go through it. I'll try to find the relevant quotes. If I'm wrong, I'll simply apologize to you because I've been wrong in the past about things. And if I'm right, then you'll just say, "Oh yeah, you're right,"
sure.
Given where this shows up.
Okay.
Yeah, let's do that.
And I am happy to. Okay, let me just the point I wanted to make was that the Taibbi Shellenberger appearance in Congress made some very broad and sloppy claims that are not easy to back up or support based on this report, as I understand it. Okay, and I did look into it myself.
They're equally difficult to refute. They are equally difficult to refute.
No,
okay?
I think it's quite easy.
It's not easy to refute. No, that's not true.
I'm sorry.
They're equally difficult to refute.
The phrase 22 million censored tweets, what people think that means is that there were 22 million tweets that were removed from the internet. That is what people think it means. And if you go in front of Congress and say that, then that is the impression that you are leaving.
If you take down a spreader account's tweet that has been reposted, if you take down a spreader account's post that is, no, it's not. If you take down a spreader account's initial post that has been retweeted 10,000 times or 100,000 times, and you do that enough times, that could easily add up to 22 million tweets. So
you're saying that each retweet, okay, so if I have a tweet that's retweeted 1 million times, and my tweet is removed, then that's 1 million cases of censorship in your book.
Yeah, that's what they thought too. I mean, that's right.
I'm sorry. That's just it's sophistical, and any average
person
would realize
that. Why is that the case? You're taking away 1 million people's right to share that information.
22 million tweets. A tweet is an individual thing. Okay,
right.
So when you hear the phrase 22 million,
and a retweet is a tweet.
I'm sorry.
Look, people have been canceled for their retweets. People have been singled out for what they've retweeted and said this is indicative of your ideas that you're saying.
I'll downgrade my claim from sophistry to just obvious hyperbole. It's obvious hyperbole.
No, I disagree completely. A retweet is a tweet. There's no reason to say that if you take down someone's
let's remind people here that you have in no way proven that the claim that they made is in any way demonstrable. Okay, you're creating a narrative based on what you said is your interpretation of how it could be true that happened. Okay, so
I'm saying my memory of having read the Long Fuse report, not my interpretation out of the.
Why are you so? Okay, let me pose a question to you. Why are you determined to believe that the defining characteristic of our media landscape is this kind of totalitarian suppression? Because everything I take from you suggests to me that you understand us to be living in something like the Soviet Union, where, there's basically just this monstrous censorship machine that's squashing free thought all around you. So you're attached to this idea of 22 million tweets because it reaffirms this vision of this kind of 1984. And Michael Shellenberger will say, we live in 1984. I think this is a ludicrous and demonstrably, completely false description of the media landscape as it exists today. I think it's laugifully wrong. Okay. But my question for you is, what I'm curious about is why
it's convenient for you that's what first of all, the way it works in our society, the way it works in America is not the way it worked in the fictional book, 1984, or even in the Soviet Union. One of the things that, when Taibbi went on Mehdi Hasan's show, they discussed these things. He wasn't refused access, right? It came out. But instead, on that show, there was a lot of lying and sleight of hand and dishonest attacks on Taibbi. There was two that I really remember. One was that he was claiming that CISA was responsible for the EIP when really it was a group called CIS, which and they pointed that out based on Taibbi's admitted mistake, where he quoted a tweet. Where he tweeted out a clip from an email and said it was CISA when it was really CIS that had made a request. Okay, so he got caught out in an error there, but the reality was that CISA and CIS were in communication. CISA had set up the EIP, and the overall claim that this was an effort coming out of the Department of Homeland Security was true. Mehdi Hasan made it seem as though that claim was hinged on this one particular point around an excerpt from an email, when it did not, when there was a slew of information behind it. Again, with the 22 million tweets, the 22 million number is not actually, I wouldn't say it was the total number of posts that were impacted by the effort to censor. I would say it most likely went well beyond that, especially if you use my definition, where if you are targeting spreader accounts, like for instance, if you are controlling the AP, then and by extension, you are going to be controlling many other newspapers' narratives, because that's a very central news source in the media landscape. So if you can control the AP, you can control the narratives in many other newspapers. The same thing is true if you're going after big spreader accounts and trying to control the narratives by removing those tweets which are being retweeted. You're establishing a lot of control by hitting the center rather than going one post at a time. Now, having said all that, that does not mean that I think that there aren't many countervailing forces in society that limit the government's ability to have the kind of total control that was imagined in 1984. And if you compare even 1984 to the reality of living in the Soviet Union, there's the amount of freedom and the ability to get information out around government censors, which is much, much greater in reality in the Soviet Union than it was in 1984. So 1984 is a hyperbolic kind of fantasy story trying to underline what it means to live in a totalitarian society. It is not a description of the lived reality of that.
I mean, Michael Shellenberger recently, repeatedly claimed like what we're living in is worse than 1984. That is a claim that he made repeatedly. So what I'm saying is there is.
Well, I would go with that. I almost made a film called. I almost made a.
He's saying
I almost made a film called Orwell Was an Optimist, and for a similar purpose, because Rick Roderick back in the 90s gave a lecture where he said, I think Orwell was a pie-eyed optimist because he his vision of a totalitarian society was one in which there was a boot stamping on a human face forever, but that assumed that there would still be human faces. That assumed that there would be any kind of resistance. So when we, so I think I don't know what Schellenberger's pointing at when he says it's worse than 1984, but if I were to say it's worse than 1984, what I would say is the reason it's worse is because so many people are no longer feel or take up their need to be able to be free to express themselves and to receive uncensored information as being primary, and that the kind of doublethink that is described in 1984 has become reified to an extent. There's especially amongst the intellectual set. So and our inability to rise up against this would have been what I would have pointed to. Now I'm much less pessimistic than I was before, given that, in fact, there's been a lot of they have failed. A lot of the institutions that were set up are now closing down. This has become a kind of public concern. The Democrats ran on censorship. The Republicans ran against it. My concern now is that, of course, the many pieces of that puzzle are still in place in something like the Restrict Act and the law that I think just passed targeting nonprofits to remove their tax exempt status based on an allegation that they're connected to terrorism. I mean, no real due process. These things remain, as does the precursor to the censorship apparatus, which was the surveillance apparatus that was built up since under Bush. So I don't think our struggle to overcome the kind of totalitarian character of the American politics of American society is over. But I do feel like there was that things were stopped here, and we might discuss that. But listen,
Sure, yeah.
why don't we pause here?
Okay.
I'm going to refill my coffee, and we can go to a second half. I wish that this had been a bit
Sounds
more civil, or I didn't
I'm
get
sorry.
heated. No, it's not. It's my fault. But
It's my fault as well.
Okay.
Sir, but I don't mind.
I don't mind either. But I just know that my audience doesn't like to see me get angry because I don't like to get angry because I feel like when you show your anger in a debate like this, everyone kind of feels like you're losing, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Well,
yeah.
I think we both got a little heated.
Yeah.
So, you know.
Yeah. All right. I'm going to stop recording here. If you enjoyed this conversation, please do consider supporting us on Patreon. Our patrons help to make sure that Sublation Media can continue to provide interviews, videos, books, and articles that are critical of the left from the left. If you are tired of remaining stuck within bourgeois ideologies and politics, help us sublate them both.